A major escalation in the Middle East unfolded on a Saturday when Israel and the United States launched a large-scale coordinated joint military operation against the Islamic Republic of Iran, marking a significant departure from past patterns in which American military involvement typically came in later stages of conflict rather than at the outset. The strikes, confirmed by Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz as preemptive in nature, were framed as a necessary response to eliminate threats that Iranian-aligned forces had been preparing against Israeli territory. Unlike previous engagements in which the United States played a more peripheral or concluding role, this operation saw American forces participating from the first wave of attacks alongside Israeli aircraft, with strikes conducted simultaneously from the air and sea across multiple Iranian cities and strategic installations. Tehran, the Iranian capital, bore the brunt of the initial assault, with multiple powerful explosions reported in the downtown University Street and Jamhuri districts. The presidential residence and the office of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei were both identified as targets in the operation, though Iranian state-aligned sources indicated that senior leadership had been relocated to undisclosed, secure locations prior to the strikes and were not present at the time of the attacks. The whereabouts and condition of Khamenei remained uncertain and subject to speculation, as he had not made any public appearance in the days leading up to the conflict, a period during which regional tensions had been escalating sharply and no confirmation of his safety or status had emerged by the time the operation was well underway. Beyond the capital, Iranian cities including Qom, Kermanshah, Isfahan and Karaj were also struck in coordinated waves, with Isfahan drawing particular strategic attention given that it hosts Iran's most significant nuclear research facility alongside major military infrastructure. The scope and simultaneity of the strikes across these locations left little ambiguity regarding the broader objective of the operation, which appeared aimed at systematically dismantling Iran's military capabilities, missile production and storage sites, and its nuclear program infrastructure in a sustained campaign that American President Donald Trump publicly described as a planned multi-day operation from the beginning. In a detailed public statement lasting approximately 8 minutes, Trump outlined the rationale and goals of the military action, delivering direct warnings to members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the regular Iranian armed forces, and the national police, urging them to lay down their arms immediately in exchange for a guarantee of full immunity and protection, while making explicitly clear that failure to surrender would result in lethal consequences from continued and intensifying American strikes. Trump also addressed the Iranian civilian population directly, expressing sympathy for ordinary Iranians whom he carefully distinguished from their governing authorities, stating that the people of Iran were deserving of far better than what the current ruling establishment had provided them, and that the military campaign was directed at the government and its security apparatus rather than at the citizenry. He urged Iranians to remain indoors for their safety as munitions continued to strike military and governmental targets throughout the country, and he called upon the civilian population to take advantage of what he described as a historic and final opportunity to reclaim control of their government once military operations had concluded, framing the American military campaign as an act of support for the Iranian people's long-standing internal resistance to clerical rule. Trump reiterated throughout his statement that the United States would under no circumstances tolerate Iran developing or possessing nuclear weapons, a position that had remained a central and non-negotiable demand throughout the diplomatic process that immediately preceded the strikes. Iran had maintained consistently throughout negotiations that its nuclear activities were entirely peaceful and oriented toward civilian energy generation. But American and allied intelligence assessments concluded otherwise, indicating that Iran had enriched uranium to weapons-grade levels and possessed the technical capability to assemble a nuclear device within weeks if political leadership chose to authorize it, an assessment that formed the core strategic justification for the military action taken. The collapse of diplomatic negotiations in Geneva, which had concluded without agreement just days before the strikes, served as the immediate trigger for the military response. Iran had refused to accept American demands for a complete and verifiable halt to uranium enrichment, and the failure of those talks brought to fruition a deadline that Trump had issued on the 19th of February, when he warned publicly that military action would follow within 10 days if no deal was reached. In the weeks prior to the strikes, the United States had substantially reinforced its military presence throughout the Middle East, deploying additional warships and fighter aircraft to the region in a buildup that was widely interpreted by regional analysts and foreign governments as preparation for exactly the kind of operation that ultimately occurred on that Saturday. Israel simultaneously expanded its military activity beyond Iranian territory, conducting heavy airstrikes in Lebanon against positions belonging to Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed militant organization that had been reported to be rebuilding its offensive infrastructure, including new rocket launch systems and tunnel networks, following its previous military setbacks in the region. Israel justified its preemptive strikes in Lebanon on the same strategic grounds applied to the Iran operation, stating that it had acted before Hezbollah could resume sustained attacks against Israeli civilians and territory. In parallel with the kinetic military operations, Israel's Foreign Intelligence Agency conducted a significant psychological warfare campaign directed at the Iranian public, using its official Persian-language social media presence to broadcast messages of solidarity with ordinary Iranians, encouraging them to document and share evidence of internal unrest and framing the broader military campaign as a collaborative effort to restore stability and dignity to Iran by removing a government that had long subjected its own people to violent repression. These messages echoed the rhetorical approach taken by Trump, positioning the military action not merely as a conflict between states but as a liberation effort on behalf of the Iranian people from a governing establishment that had killed thousands of its own citizens during internal crackdowns on civilian protests in preceding years. Israel also declared a nationwide state of emergency and closed its airspace entirely in anticipation of Iranian retaliatory strikes, formally acknowledging that Iran retained the capacity to launch drone and missile attacks, and that Israeli civilians should remain prepared for potential counterstrikes at any moment. The threat of Iranian retaliation extended well beyond Israel's borders, prompting Gulf states including Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates to raise their security alert levels significantly, as these nations host American military bases and substantial numbers of foreign nationals that Iran had previously threatened to target in the event of large-scale conflict with the West. The United States diplomatic mission in Qatar issued an urgent directive to American citizens and staff to shelter in secure locations immediately, reflecting the expectation that Iranian counterstrikes could be wide-ranging and imminent. The implications of the conflict for the global economy were immediately apparent to financial analysts and policymakers, with widespread concern that any Iranian decision to block or disrupt maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, through which a substantial portion of the world's seaborne oil supply passes daily, could trigger a severe and rapid spike in crude oil prices on international markets. Even the credible threat of such disruption, independent of any actual blockade being implemented, carries the well-documented potential to destabilize energy markets globally, and nations heavily dependent on oil imports face the prospect of significant increases in fuel prices and the inflationary pressures that historically accompany such sudden supply shocks. Financial markets reacted to the outbreak of hostilities with immediate anxiety, with notable sell-offs occurring as trading sessions opened in Asian markets, reflecting investor concern over the broader and potentially prolonged economic consequences of an extended, regional conflict involving two of the most militarily capable actors in the Middle East alongside American forces. The safety of foreign nationals residing and working across Middle Eastern countries also emerged as a pressing concern for numerous governments and diaspora communities around the world. In many respects, the events of that Saturday represented the culmination of a long-building confrontation that had been widely anticipated by regional analysts, intelligence officials, and governments across the international community. Multiple nations had issued urgent advisories to their citizens in Iran in the days before the strikes began, urging immediate departure from the country, suggesting that intelligence agencies in those countries possessed advance awareness that military action was both imminent and likely to be extensive in scale. The operation reflected a fundamental shift in the strategic posture of both the United States and Israel toward Iran, moving away from a policy of containment, deterrence, and periodic limited engagement toward one of direct, sustained, and coordinated military confrontation aimed at comprehensively degrading Iran's capacity to project power across the region, eliminating its nuclear capabilities before they could be weaponized and potentially forcing a fundamental transformation in the political character of the Iranian government itself. Whether the strikes would achieve those far-reaching objectives, and what form Iran's response would ultimately take in the hours and days that followed, remained deeply uncertain as the conflict entered its opening phase. With the international community watching closely and with considerable apprehension for signs of either further escalation or a credible pathway toward negotiated de-escalation in one of the most consequential geopolitical crises the Middle East had witnessed in many years.